All right, today I want to go over and talk about the Polaris four-wheeler all-wheel drive or the demand drive system. In this housing here, I'm going to turn the wheel so you can see you've got what they call a Hillard clutch. It's a one-way clutch. It is a clutch that'll grab and engage when it senses wheel spin. They call it a demand drive. It takes a special oil. There's several wheel bearings in there. There's this special Hillard clutch that sits right in the middle of this hub here, and it takes some service work. It does fail at some point, so I wanted to show you and go through a couple different tips on these, as well as show you how to replace these and go through and rebuild and how to service these. So first thing we're going to do, pull this wheel off. One thing to note, you do not have to remove this hub to change the oil. All you have to do to change the oil on here, there's an Allen bolt on the side of this hub here. Find that Allen bolt, loosen it up, drain the oil out of it. It takes quite a while because it is a very heavy oil. So just take and spin that down so that plug is on the bottom side. Let that oil drain out. When you're ready to fill that oil back up, turn that plug so it's halfway across there, and you add the amount of oil that your book recommends, which typically if you put it horizontal here, you're going to fill it up to that plug there. So. Actually going to remove this plug yet so that we don't have oil dumping all over this wheel here. I'm going to remove this wheel and then get into this Hillard clutch. All right, now we've got the hub exposed. We got the caliper back here. This is your brake disc here. And if we're going to pull this hub off, we do need to pull this caliper off. We are not going to pull the hose. That way we don't have to bleed these brakes. This caliper here takes a 13 millimeter. 2 bolts holding this caliper on. Go ahead and remove those. We're going to pull this caliper off now at this time. Set that aside. Now what we're going to do, because the next thing that we need to do, there's a nut in here that we're going to have to remove to pull this hub. We're going to take and pull these Allens. But before I do that, because a lot of times if you just do that, you're going to have oil spill everywhere. If there's oil in here, which sometimes they run them till they're completely dry. And a lot of times that's what happens as to why these Hillard clutches fail. Typically, unless they are used and abused so much, these Hillard clutches will last a long time. I'm going to take my drain pan here, put it underneath. I'm going to take my hub and pour it upside down. You can see the oil coming out there. Get that so it's faced straight down. That way it can just run right out of there. If you have it tipped up, your plug's on the side here, you're not going to drain all that oil. So make sure you've got that in the correct position. Also on this drain plug, there is a magnet on the bottom of it, and it will catch, it's intended to catch any kind of debris that's going around inside of that housing there. Now once we start draining it, what I like to do then, find my Torx bit, it's a T25, and we can remove this cap. Now again, if we're just changing oil in this hub here, we don't have to pull this cap. But I wanted to show you everything about this drive system, so I'm going to pull this cap here. We're going to pull this hub off. All right, we have the 3 Torx screws out there. And I'm going to grab a larger screwdriver, and then it'll give you places you can put a screwdriver in here to pry this open. This is a plastic cap. Some models, they have aluminum caps, I think on the older Trail Boss systems. But most of the newer four-wheelers, newer I mean like 2000s, have a plastic cap, and they're sealed with an O-ring. So want to make sure you don't damage this plastic. Okay, there'll be a little bit more oil that comes out. Now we've got a nut on here that you can see there that we'll pull off. But first we've got a pin running through there. Take this pin, straighten it out. Again, being careful you don't score up around inside here, because what's sealing it is this O-ring here. If you take a screwdriver or your side dikes and damage in here, scrape that up, you're gonna cause that to leak. Now I've got that pin partially out there. Take and pull this pin out completely. Grab that pin. You can reuse that. A lot of times, because of the oil in here, these don't get rusted out. A lot of times you can take and save these and reuse them. Now sometimes I felt it with my finger because sometimes these nuts are extremely loose, and they shouldn't be that loose, but you're not supposed to torque them down a bunch. There's a handful of tapered bearings in here that won't work like they should if you over tighten that. Okay, I've got a 24 millimeter socket here. I've got that cotter pin removed. Take it just regular thread. Again, it's not, these nuts should not be very tight at all. And I'll get you the specs on there when we're going back together. You can take, and now we've got a washer. Pulled the nut off, now we have a washer. And I take and I'll put a rag down here because there's gonna be a handful of parts that come out of here that are gonna have some oil on them. So now what I do is I just take this and I kind of keep my finger over top here, and if you move that around a little bit, your bearing will come out. This is your first tapered bearing. I leave these in the order that they go on my rag. Don't have to do that, just sometimes makes it easier going back together. Now take, and you'll start dripping oil out of the back of this hub now, so just pay really close attention to that. The other thing you want to be careful is that there's a couple spacers and washers. You want to make sure that those stay in the right position there. Now on the back side here, we have got a specialty spacer. That looks like that, and it's got 3 tabs on there. I'll show you where those 3 tabs go, but that's there. Again, keeping in mind where that's gonna go. Now you can take and pull your Hillard clutch out. There's your Hillard clutch, that's what it looks like there. I'll give you a closer view of it and show you how that works. Set that down there. Then you have your tapered bearings, another tapered bearing. So these 2 tapered bearings, the one that we pulled out, the one that we just took off, sit like this on this hub. So keep in mind that order. Now you've got a seal here, so you want to make sure that that's good. That seals up this area here. And also you're going to have some oil drip for a while coming off this hub. So I'm going to take and just set that on top of our drain pan. I'm going to move this aside because there's not going to be much more oil that drips down from here. And then we've got one more bearing. I take and I just kind of rattle this a little bit, and this bearing will pop out there. That's our bearing that goes behind our Hillard clutch there. Now there's one more wheel bearing back under behind this knuckle here. Typically these wires will run up. There's some caulking in here to cover these wires. They'll run up. I've got my meter here, and typically, obviously, these wires are going to run all the way up. They're going to run up to the electrical panel up by the speedometer, and so I wouldn't be testing them down here. I'd be testing them up there, but I'm going to set my multimeter on resistance. I'm going to test these 2 wires. They're reading 23.9, which is good. Those are testing good. If you've got a incredibly large number or it's reading OFL, then you will probably have an issue with your ring in here. But if they're reading in the 23, 24 range, then your ring is good. And we'll do a separate video on replacing that ring. But this ring is testing good. Obviously, I've got to fix our connectors here, solder some wires back together. I wanted to show you though quick, going back together. If we do need to replace that wheel bearing that's back behind here, all you simply have to do, pull your tie rod end here, pull your lower ball joint bolt here, drop your A-arm. You're going to be able to pull this hub out far enough and pull that wheel bearing, that last tapered wheel bearing, off the back here. Going back together now, I'm going to take a tapered wheel bearing, put it in there. So all these tapered wheel bearings are the same size, but just because I have them in order, I'm going to may as well go back in order with them. Slide that one in, make sure it feels good, make sure it fits properly. Now this is something that's important. You want to make sure that you've got a good one. See, there's 3 teeth on here that you want to make sure that fits into this the grooves on this Hillard clutch here. So I want to give you a close-up of this here. We've got your Hillard clutch here. We've got your teeth on there. But this Hillard clutch that is in very good condition. A couple things that wear on here are these rollers. They can get squared off. Right here, this is, I would say, where I see the biggest problems, where these points are on this spot here. These rollers will start wearing so much that they'll start wearing these points off of there, and this outer cage here will just start rolling around this hex spacer here. So you want to make sure that these points are good on this spacer, this inner piece here. You want to make sure that that spring's attached. You want to make sure that your rollers are actually round, and you want to make sure that these this hex area here, or this flat area here, is not grooved and not cut into these posts here. Also check these splines. I don't typically see these go bad, but if you run this without oil in it, that could potentially be a problem. Also going back together, you want to make sure that this spacer is there. This does come out. And this basket here, I actually was showing you a couple things, and it fell apart here. And so, which is okay. It's easy to get back together. Just take, and I try to keep as many of those rollers in place as I can. I'll take and fit this spacer in there and slide it down. Now, you're not gonna be able to get all those rollers in there probably first try. So what you do then, just take, you just fit them underneath that spring. Be careful you don't break that spring. Put too much pressure on it, stretch it out. You do wanna make sure that you can get all those rollers into place there. Now, again, without dumping this all apart here, make sure you've got that spacer in place there. Make sure that this plate, that the teeth are good, that they fit into those grooves there. Make sure that doesn't spin around or do anything like that. And then slide this Hillard clutch on. Now you can take and put this bearing on here. And that's the way that it should look. And then we're going to put that hub on there and put our final tapered bearing on there. So grab our hub. Again, checking to make sure that this O-ring is good, or this seal here is good. If it's not, replace it, clean it up like really well. Take and slide that on. And then you should be able to spin that freely. This shouldn't be held up, shouldn't be clicking or clanking, shouldn't be have any kind of resistance at all. It should just be able to spin that freely. Now you take your last bearing there, throw that on there, take your nut and your washer, put that on there. Now this bolt here, it's a 24 millimeter bolt. That is only going to be torqued to 12 foot-pounds. So that is not very many foot-pounds. Make sure that you've got that torqued correctly. And then you can take, kind of move it around a little bit to make sure that those bearings are seated. And then take a torque wrench, tighten that down to 12 foot-pounds. And you're going to want to stop at where there's a hole that's running through your castle nut there, in order to get this cotter pin back through there. Put that pin through there, fold over the tabs there, and then put this cap on, tighten your torques down, and then put the correct amount of oil that your manual says into that hole there, and use the proper oil. That way you're not destroying your Hillard clutch. And they are from Polaris. They're a couple $100 for those Hillard clutches, so it's not something you want to mess with. Use good oil, change that often so that you aren't having to replace that Hillard clutch. Again, we're going to go through a couple other videos on this machine as we go through and service it. I've done an overview, I've replaced belts, I have cleaned carburetors, I have removed carburetors, and done videos on all that stuff, gone through the front differential, gone through the transmission, rebuilt the motor. So if you've got questions on anything on this four-wheeler, make sure and let me know in the comments below. If the video's been helpful, make sure you like and subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you are notified when I've got more videos posted on the ATVs and motorcycles. Thanks for watching.